So these are my October socks from a while back, a couple of years I think. And if you scroll back on the channel you can find them. I was kind of knitting them as I went along. Each colour is a different kind of day. So if you fancy knitting those, kind of knit in the same way apart from what we're doing now, that is, apart from these toes which are not rounded. So we're doing rounded toes this time. Yeah. Anyway, I've got them here. You might be wondering why. Because these are the ones we're modelling our pattern on. So these were 72 stitch, as far as I can remember. But it's more the length really that I'm looking at. The length from toe to heel, and then from heel to cuff. So let's have a look at the foot area, because we've just finished that now. Right, so I've just popped it over this sock just so you can see where we are, and the heel starts here and we're up to the heel now. Now the thing is, you won't have a sock that you've previously knitted, maybe, I'm not quite sure. You might have a sock. If you've got a sock with a heel, you can tell just from that sock. It's a sock that fits you nicely. If you can't, find your ankle, which is, mine is there, the knobbly bit, and then it's straight down. So actually a ruler would be handy. So there's the ankle, and it's basically a straight line down towards your foot really, and that's how much you knit at the bottom. So when you're knitting a toe-up sock, you don't necessarily have to measure it. You can just measure it on your foot as you go along, which I find really handy. And when you get to the ankle, you can just say, well, is it in line with the ankle? And if it's in line, that means I can think about putting the heel in, or I can think about putting the waist yarn in. And we're going to be putting waist yarn in. Yeah, so we're in the right spot now. I'm going to count these and tell you how many there are. But really I'd advise you to measure it on your foot and see if you've gotten to the heel. Yeah, as you go. Bubbles is on cat watch. We are carrying on with our sock, and as you can see I have knit up the foot area. So we started with the Turkish cast on here, then we did the increases and we made the toe, and really it's just the end of the toe, isn't it? And then we started our helical knit from here, and we were using 2 yarns. So we used the Drops Fable here in the beginning, quite nice, and then we used the King Cole, and we mixed. So there was 1 strand Drops Fable, 1 strand, oh sorry, not 1 strand, yeah, 1 strand, but 1 row of Drops Fable, then 1 row of King Cole. So it was like that. So you've got kind of stripy, and it's a stripy effect going on. It's quite subtle, I think. Yeah, a lot of mine are really colourful, so this is kind of a bit laid back, to be honest. But it's quite nice. I'm kind of liking it. I especially like this colour. That's quite nice. And let me just get that other sock. Right, so here's the other sock, and as you can see, the toe is slightly different because it wasn't a rounded toe, so the toe is slightly longer anyway. But we're looking at this foot area from the toe to the heel, and like I said, it's the best thing to do is to measure it on yourself. But if you don't want to do that, or you get confused, get a sock that's got a heel on it, and then you just knit up to the heel area. Now this is slightly longer, actually. Is it slightly longer? You've got to remember it's going to shrink as well. Yeah, so I've given it a generous amount, and you can do so too if you want to. But you can be very precise, and what you do is you measure from the end. So you don't kind of measure from here. So you have to measure from the end of the sock up to the heel area. Yeah, and I don't mind it being generous. So when you have done that, you can always count your stitches and keep a record in your little notebook. And I don't know where mine is at the moment, so I'll find it for later. Right, so let me show you now what we're going to do. So the idea is to do an Afterthought heel. So that's an Afterthought heel. You can actually just knit it on now if you want to, but I'm going to do an Afterthought. And with an Afterthought, what you do is you put a line of waste yarn here, and well, not on the other side, of course, you just knit the other side normally, but the line goes in here. And I'm going to show you how to pop that line of waste yarn in now. I hope that all makes sense. You need a foot or you need a sock. You need to measure it up to the heel. When you're up to the heel, you need to stop, and then you need to add in the waste yarn now. So let's get going. So I'm going to use this baby yarn. I think it's just a Drops Merino, actually, 4-ply for babies. So yeah. The reason I'm using, this colour, for instance, that's going to show up. So using a contrasting colour is a good idea. Yeah. So I'm going to use that. Let's get started. Right, so I've organised my needles, and this is the working needle. So I've got that kind of in working position. So this is the yarn I'm actually using, and this is the one I'm going to be using. But for the purposes of the waste yarn, we're not going to use either. We're going to use our waste yarn. So we're not using either of those threads, but yarns, but we keep them on. We don't cut them. We don't do anything with them. They are where they are, and we keep them there. And it's very simple. We're just going to do one of the sides of the row. So if you think the row is 72 stitches all the way round, one of the sides is going to be 36. So you need to count to make sure you've got 36. So you want to get one side exactly. So I've got 36, so I'm not going to worry about counting. And then I'm just going to add in my yarn, and you just add it in normally as you would add in yarn. So you have a good old tail length, and you hold it in the back, and then you get your working needle. Make sure you've got this needle, this set rather, and then you just knit as normal. So I'm just gonna and you're just going to knit. So you're just going to knit to the end of this part of the row, which is one side of the sock basically. And it's quite tricky getting the camera to angle on the middle, the actual work. It's something I probably need to work on. Okay, so now we've come to this part, which is where we'd actually now start the helical again, but we're just going to knit over it and not worry about it at all. Just pull that in a little bit. This is quite a nice yarn to knit with, actually. It's quite satisfying. It's kind of poofy. Whereas sock knitting yarn isn't really poofy. It's nice to knit with, but it's quite, because it's quite thin. Right, so we've knit one side, and now we're just going to cut our yarn from here. Right, so I just cut it with the scissors. Had to root around for the scissors, of course. Now, what do we do next? We do not want to knit here because we've got no yarn to knit with. So we're going to literally pull our needle back, something you wouldn't normally do, like so. so that it becomes the working needle again. So in effect you're kind of knitting this twice, this row, but you're now going to knit with your normal yarn. So move that tail out the way, fold it in, bring round your working needle, and then just start knitting. Knitting that row again. So obviously you wouldn't normally do this unless you make a mistake and you do it by accident. And it does happen, especially when your helical yarns are kind of at both ends like this. Sometimes you might actually knit with the wrong one, but you know, that's a story for another day. Probably a boring story. Okay, so we're coming up to our helical yarn, if you like, the next helical, because they're both helical, aren't they? But okay, the one you're about to knit could be called the helical. So I'm just going to slip these 3. Actually, I don't need to slip them, but anyway, I'll slip them anyway for continuity. And then we're going to use our other yarn. And there we are, we're back on track with helical knitting. And then what you're going to do is when you get round back to here, you're just going to knit from here as normal. So when you get back to the last 3 stitches of the red, slip them and then continue knitting with the red, and that's what you're going to do. So I'm just going to knit round until I get here and then show you what I mean. In case you don't get it, you know, in case I'm like really confusing, which I feel I am, to be honest. But everyone's confusing nowadays. No, they're not. No, they're not. Right. Okay. So I'm going to knit to the I'm going to knit to these 3 stitches and show you what we're doing. Right. So I knit all the way round. So we were kind of here, weren't we? A second ago. I knit all the way round, and I just knit normally onto the next 2 needles as well. And then I've knit back onto this needle, and I'm here now. So I've got the next helical yarn up for grabs, as it were. Right, so I'm going to drop that yarn now, and I'm going to slip these stitches like so, and then continue knitting with this yarn. There we are. And now we're just going to continue knitting as normal. Right. So clattery, even with this canvasy background. Yeah. So at some point, when we've knit all this up, we're going to pick up these stitches, these blue ones, take them out and put the heel in. Yeah. So let me just show you on the sock. And there's our sock. And there's our waste yarn. And it's gone in there. So we are going to carry on knitting now. Oops. We're going to carry on knitting till we get to the cuff. So this, again, you can try your sock on if you like, or you can measure it up from your heel. So that will be your heel area, your ankle. So you can measure it up from your ankle. So your ankle will be about here. And you can think, how long do I want it? Now, if you wanted just a shorty sock, you could have it sort of this long maybe. So you don't have to have that many rows. I mean, it does take quite a while to knit some rows sometimes. And it can be boring, but when you do helical knitting, it's not that boring. Also, the other thing you can do now is you can actually change up and add a pattern in here if you want. So let's say you're bored of doing this now, you could actually add in maybe a solid colour and do a cable or a lace or a ferrule, even like 2 colour work or something. Totally up to you. I kind of continue usually because it still for me holds interest, you know, because it's always different, which is quite nice. But if you wanted to, you could do something else here, so that's totally up to you. But anyway, I rather, I'm continuing with this, and I will show you some of this progress as I go along, maybe when I'm out and about or in a cafe, something like that. And then when we get to here, that's when we're going to be doing the cuff. So yeah, so I will see you back here for the next episode. And then after that, we'll have one more episode where we need to put in the heel, the Afterthought heel. So, and we will be done with one sock, and then it will be time to get on with the next one. So there we go. So referring back to our little diagram we did, we have now done the cast on. We've done the increases there, and we've done the foot area. So we're up to here. We're going to not do the heel yet, and we're going to just continue up the leg. After the leg, we'll do the cuff, then we'll go back and we'll do the heel right at the end. So yeah, well, that's keeping us on track, that diagram is. Yeah, so I shall see you later.